This podcast is part of the Batman Universe Podcast Network, hosted by the BatmanUniverse.net. Check out everything related to Batman and the entire Bat family at the BatmanUniverse.net, including news and original content related to comics, movies, television, merchandise, video games, and more. Also, check out some of the other unique podcasts that TBU has to offer. Consider supporting this podcast by becoming a patron on Patreon. Even $1 can go a long way in supporting this content that you enjoy. Look for a link over at thebatmanuniverse.net to offer your support now. And now, on with the show.
In 2008, a podcast was created with one goal: to bring Bat fans around the world news related to movies, comics, video games, television, merchandise, and so much more. And now, the Batman Universe Podcast has returned.
Hello everyone, welcome to the latest episode of the Batman Universe Podcast. Today I am joined by Adil, Hanan, and Scott, and today we are going to be talking about the controversy surrounding the Batwoman TV series. Before we get into the current events, and this is something that's just happened in the past few weeks, it's something that I've wanted to discuss mostly because I think stuff like this kind of flies under the radar when it comes to the fandom unless you're dialed into the specific show or a specific actor or actress. I think that's what happens, is that the fandom kind of glosses over stuff like this. So rather than immediately picking a side, I'm going to lay out kind of the events that have taken place leading up to last month, and then we will be talking about the allegations that were raised against the Batwoman production, and then we'll kind of give our take on kind of the situation as a whole. Think of this as more of like an informative discussion, and then we're not necessarily saying one person's, that Ruby Rose is right or Ruby Rose is wrong. That's not the intent behind our conversation, our discussion today. It's more of a, let's talk about what's been happening, and let's talk about, kind of the allegations themselves, the counter from Warner Brothers, that kind of stuff, and let's just kind of discuss where we're at in kind of thinking where this is going to go from now, because at this point it's been just under a month since these allegations were raised, and quite honestly it made a lot of headlines and it just kind of has disappeared, and that might be the case. That might be all that ends up happening. So let's get into what exactly happened. So for those of you who don't know, the Batwoman TV series that airs on the CW here in the United States, it cast Ruby Rose as its main character, Kate Kane, Batwoman, for the TV series. Obviously, she was actually cast for Batwoman prior to the series actually being picked up, because she appeared in the World's Finest crossover for the Arrowverse shows prior to the Batwoman series actually getting greenlit. Obviously, the series got greenlit, it got picked up, they were filming it, and then initially when the show first was getting underway, before it even premiered, there was some situations that arose where something happened on set and it prevented Ruby Rose from getting to Comic-Con before the Comic-Con prior to the show premiering, and there was some things that raised. I'll get into those in a little bit, but it's important to start off with that because there was something that occurred that prevented her from being able to appear at Comic-Con, and it kind of raised some flags for some people about why she wasn't there. Some people believed at the time that it was due to the fact that she was slightly overwhelmed by what was going on. Some people chalked it up to the production schedule, and it really wasn't made clear. She came in and made an appearance via video and just basically said they were in the middle of filming, so it kind of gave some sort of inclination that it was intended that it was the production schedule, but that's the extent. Skip forward to the end of 2020, or the beginning of 2020, and obviously COVID happens. The global pandemic shuts down a lot of different things all across the world, and in the process, the Wonder Woman TV series had yet to wrap up its final season, or its first season of the final episodes of its first season. While this is happening, the show actually is instead of getting shut down, they were trying to wrap up their final episodes prior to really the big shutdowns that were coming up. And in the case, the show ended up having, I think, 3 less episodes than it was supposed to because of the shutdowns. And before they picked back up filming for the second season, Ruby Rose came out in May of 2020, specifically May 19th, and it was announced that she would be leaving the series ahead of season 2. Specifically, her statement that was released from her people said, "I have made the very difficult decision to not return to Batwoman next season. This was not a decision I made lightly, and as I have the utmost respect for the cast, crew, and everyone involved with the show in both Vancouver and in Los Angeles, I am beyond appreciative to Greg Berlanti, Sarah Shetter, and Caroline Dries for not only giving me this incredible opportunity, but for welcoming me into the DC Universe. They have been so beautifully that they have so beautifully created. Thank you, Peter Roth and Mark Pedowitz and the teams at Warner Brothers and the CW who put so much into the show and always believed in me. Thank you, everyone who made this season a success." So basically, that was it. There wasn't a whole lot of information as to why she was leaving. The show they automatically said from the show's side of it that they were not going to end the series despite the fact that she was leaving, and immediately they went into the fact that they were going to not recast Kate Kane, but kind of tell Batwoman from a different story lens and create a new character. And that is kind of outside of it, but obviously Jessica, Ryan Wilder is the new character that is playing Batwoman, and Jessica Levickles, I'm probably saying that wrong. She is the actress that was cast as Batwoman, the Ryan Wilder version of it. So that was the first bit of information. Then just a day later, there was a little report saying why exactly she left, and it said that according to multiple sources, Rose was unhappy with the long hours required of her as the series lead, which led to friction on the set. It was thus decided by her and the network and the studio, Warner Brothers Television, that they would all part ways. Nobody, including Rose, commented on that situation, but that was basically the extent of what happened. Then, moving forward, just about a week later, Ruby Rose decided to break her silence by stating on an Instagram story, "It wasn't an easy decision, but those who know. I don't want to acknowledge everyone involved and how big this was for TV and our community. I've stayed silent because that's my choice for now, but I adore you all. I'm sure next season will be amazing also." So kind of leading into this idea of maybe something was happening behind the scenes that she wasn't happy with, but she specifically, didn't say a whole lot. And it could have been she had an NDA. There could have been other reasons why she wasn't saying anything at the time because she was still technically under contract. There's a lot of different reasons. You skip forward to just about 4 months later. She explained how the pandemic played a role in her decision to leave. She specifically said, "Being the lead of a superhero show is tough. Being the lead in anything is tough. But I think in that particular instance, it was more difficult because I was still recovering from my surgery. I had surgery and then 10 days later I went to work, which maybe wasn't the best idea. Most people take about a month or 3 off before they return to work, so it was definitely made more difficult by that. But as far as being a lead of a show or a film, regardless if it's action or if it's emotional, in whichever way it's taxing, challenge is sort of outweighed. The accomplishment and trust the people put in you to do that role, and there's also this vibrancy of being able to come on set and set the mood and tone, and trust being put into something that has been such an honor. I've loved my experience in Batwoman. I'm so grateful that we got to achieve everything that we wanted." She specifically talked about part of the reason she decided to step away was because while the pandemic was occurring, she took time to do some introspection, and after mulling things over, she decided that there were several reasons for her to depart the series. She said that she's very proud of the series, but it had a lot to do with the fact that it was tolling in one way or another. Then, a month later, she gave yet a little bit of an interview on SiriusXM's The Jess Cagle Show, where the Australian actress admitted that going back to work so quickly was tricky, but she made it clear that wasn't the major reason why she chose not to return for season 2. She said, "They really accommodated trying to help me out as best they could, going back so early after the accident because we wanted to obviously meet the release date of the show. I think what played a bigger part of my decision to quit the show was more we got shut down early. We didn't get to finish the first season, which is such a shame, especially for a first season of a show. Then we went into lockdown with COVID, and thinking of in quarantine and lockdown, there was a lot of thought and reflection, and kind of everyone did it. We kind of all thought about where we were at. So Warner Brothers and Greg Berlanti and we were discussing the show and we had a conversation." She didn't then go into further details, but she said they sort of mutually agreed that probably was the best for the show at the time, that they all go in a different direction and that she goes in a different direction. Then she said earlier this year in July, she specifically said she gave another reason as to potentially why she left, saying that she exited Batwoman due to an allergy. She said, "I did find out that I was allergic to latex. It was getting worse and worse, and because you get more contact with it, I guess you get more reactions. I took off with the mask at the end, and my face was just in hives. My throat was all messed up." That's yet another reason. Then we've got in early October, she basically gave a slew of allegations as to why she left. And she said she did not quit. She actually ruined Kate Kane and they destroyed Batwoman for her. She followed orders and she decided that she was going to have to sign her rights away if she was going to stay. She said that she basically was she was put in a position where the producers were abusive and that things were just not great, and she was not liking everything going on. There was basically a lot of situations where there was issues with the stunts. Obviously, she was injured doing a stunt, and that's what the surgery she was referring to. But that's basically the gist of the allegations. She said that there was a lot of issues on set. There was a lot of issues with people getting injured and how that was playing an emotional toll on her. She said not only was the production crew as well as the producers and the production company, which was Warner Brothers Television, having issues with her, she was having issues with how they were reacting to certain things, and that's ultimately why they all decided to go in a different direction. Warner Brothers Television responded in a release after she gave these allegations, basically saying that she was giving a revisionist history that she is sharing online aimed at the producers, the cast, and the crew, the network, and the studio. And the truth is, Warner Brothers Television decided not to exercise its option to engage Ruby for a second season based on multiple complaints about workplace behavior that were extensively reviewed and handled privately out of respect for all who were concerned. So it was kind of a case of he said, she said, and there was a lot of Rose getting very upset. Before we get into kind of how we feel specifically about everything going on, did any of you guys follow along with anything that was going on and have any kind of immediately get some sort of sense that something else was going on outside of what we were being told initially when it was announced that she was leaving the series?
I loosely was following what was happening because, to be honest, I started the Batwoman show and then just fell out and didn't keep up with it as life got really busy. And then saw the news reports she was leaving and thought it was really bizarre. But to be honest, didn't really dig much into it just because I had other things that I was more interested in. So that was my initial impression. Reading 7 different articles of her saying it was great and fine and nothing was wrong. And then the last one that came out was very intriguing because it was very different. But my initial thoughts on it was very casual and I was not really invested.
Yeah, I kind of followed along with it from a distance. I don't watch the show, but I was mainly interested in this issue because at first glance, I think it has certain similarities with the Ray Fisher situation with the Justice League movie. So I was just kind of following along. And I think, as we'll probably get into later, I think there are a number of differences. But yeah, I just from looking at it from afar, I got a sense that there's some other things going on beneath the surface.
I mean, I figured there probably was, just because the way, the initial release, kind of mentioned that she was leaving. It was one of those like very corporate, amicable parting of ways, but I didn't really follow it beyond that. I just, it was a new show. It's not one I'm actively watching, and up until that point, you mentioned that they didn't get like a full huge season out of it, so it didn't seem like there was that many episodes anyway. So it was just creative differences or what have you, whatever that generic term they like to throw around, and that was as far as my interest into diving into it was initially.
Yeah, I will say, so my take, I started watching the show. I think the first 3 episodes, and it's not so much that I gave up on it necessarily as I just was really busy with a lot of other things, and I just assumed I would get back to it once the full season released, because I just am the type of person nowadays where if I have the ability to binge watch something, I'll binge watch something, but if I have to watch something week to week, I just don't have as much interest in it, just because I don't have the patience or the time to sit down and watch a show week to week and deal with it being on network television and commercials and all of that. I guess, third world problems or first world problems. That said, there was a little bit of a situation that I think was odd to begin with. I brought it up earlier when I was talking about how the fact that she didn't make the Comic-Con appearance. There was some talk amongst the fandom back during that summer before the series premiered that, obviously everybody knew that Green Arrow and Arrow was going to be ending, and Stephen Amell was on his way out after 8 seasons of the series, or after 8 seasons of that series, and Batwoman was kind of coming in to kind of take the new place as like the main show for the Arrowverse. Flash didn't really ever seem like it could do that, and quite honestly, if you pay attention to what's going on with the Arrowverse right now, you probably wish that Flash wasn't the main show that was being focused on in the group of shows that are actually being released. Batwoman was intended to be kind of the new show for Arrow. And Ruby Rose was going to be the character right at the front, the actress who was going to basically be the face of the Arrowverse or the DC Universe on the CW for the foreseeable future. That was the entire intent. They were very, very heavy with the marketing of Batwoman prior to the series even having a date of when it was going to be releasing. They were very heavy on marketing Ruby Rose as Batwoman for that crossover that happened before the series even got picked up. They were really, really making sure that this could happen. And considering Ruby Rose, I'm not saying that she wasn't an established actress, but she doesn't have a huge lengthy resume. She had a pretty good stint on Orange is the New Black on Netflix. She was in the Warner Brothers movie The Meg, but she was a supporting character for that. So this was big because she was coming from a place that was already established, while you had other people like Grant Gustin from The Flash or Stephen Amell, who, yeah, they've done projects, but really their breakout roles were these CW DC Universe shows. Ruby Rose had already been established to a degree, so they were already going after somebody who was established in the realm of being an actor. So the thing that happened during the fandom was that everybody was talking about how Ruby Rose is going to be the new face of the entire Arrowverse with Stephen Amell on his way out. And then Comic-Con comes around and she was scheduled to be there. We know full well from past Comic-Cons that when stars are intended to be at Comic-Con, the production, regardless of whether it's happening or not, they show up to Comic-Con. That's just what happens. They've made comments at panels in the past about how they were filming the night before and they jumped on a plane to come down to Comic-Con to make sure that they were there for their fans. Now, when Ruby Rose wasn't there and the first panel for Batwoman was 2 producers talking about what was going to be happening on the show and just a small video clip from Ruby Rose, it raised some red flags automatically to me, because it came across, and I know it was interpreted online as, well, she's too big of a star to show up to Comic-Con, and then it kind of got morphed into, well, she's not dealing with the popularity of these shows because she hasn't really experienced that with some of the other projects that she's worked on. She doesn't have that experience with having to deal with like thousands and thousands and potentially millions of people, really being committed to these to a character that she's playing. So there was no word on exactly what it was, but then it comes out, of course, that she was actually injured. She had surgery. The reason she wasn't able to come was because she was still recovering from that surgery. And that was basically the gist of what happened. But it kind of, that initial not coming out and saying exactly what happened, and this is not Ruby Rose's fault. This is, whoever decided, hey, we need to make sure that we do not tell everybody that she was just injured and that's why she's not at Comic-Con. They're the ones who are to blame, because ultimately it came down to she was being painted in this negative light specifically because of something that happened that was outside of necessarily her control, with the injury that caused her to have surgery. All of that aside, obviously when she was taken off the show, or she left the show, or however it ended up happening, depending on who you ask, the other side of things that occurred is that for a long stretch of time, she gave a lot of reasons as to why she was leaving the show, but none of them really seemed to be the exact same thing. It was like every time somebody was interviewing her and asked her, so whatever happened with Batwoman, she gave a different version or a different answer for the reason as to why she left. Now, like I said, part of that is probably when they originally had her on the show, she was contracted for multiple seasons up front. When they decided to have her go, it's kind of like a severance kind of situation where as long as she doesn't say anything for a certain amount of time about whatever it is that's going on, she probably makes some sort of money off of the success of the show as long as the show's still on, because she was associated with it up front. I don't know that for sure. I just assume that because that's typically, you don't have an actor who's cast as the titular character and then not have them contract her for multiple seasons up front. You just typically don't do that. So the fact that she either left or she was asked to leave meant there was in some way some sort of compensation for her leaving. My guess is that her compensation ran up after a year of being gone, and that's why these allegations came out conveniently shortly after the third season aired on the CW, or started airing new episodes, was because of that very reason. Now, the interesting part about it is there's that one comment she made about, there's a lot of things that are going around. If there could, that kind of bends into the idea that there was problems on set one way or the other, whether it was she was having issues with the production team or the production team was having issues with her. It could go either way. And honestly, you could interpret it either way as well, because ultimately it's going to be a case of he said, she said, and who's thinking they're in the right and who thinks they're in the wrong. I mean, that's up to debate on from what perspective you're looking at it from. From her perspective, she could have been looking at it from one point of view, and the production team is looking at it from a completely different point of view. But let's get into the other side of it, which is, do you think it was a good idea? I know, Otto, you brought up the Ray Fisher stuff, and I know that does play into this, as not play into specifically what she's did, but you see the similarities where you have an actor who is associated with a project. The project either, one, didn't turn out exactly the way they hoped, or they're very outspoken about what's going on with the series, or in this case, she wasn't saying anything bad about the series itself, other than the fact that they didn't get to finish the first season completely until they finished that story. But you have somebody who's having issues with people behind the scenes. In Ray Fisher's case, he was having issues with Joss Whedon and everything that happened with Warner Brothers behind the scenes, of how everything played out with how Justice League and the Snyder Cut didn't happen until much later, and all of that. There was a lot of other things that were being accused as well, with executives being said, people saying that executives, or Ray Fisher specifically saying that executives were doing things. In this case, Ruby Rose is accusing certain executives behind the scenes with Batwoman, similar type things where people are having issues and saying that it's my way or the highway kind of situations. Did you guys see did you make the connections between obviously, Otto, you already said you did, but do you see this somehow becoming a slight trend where if an actor is not getting the kind of the good recognition that you would hope for, or being associated with being it being a really good performance, that if something happens where they decide to go into a different direction because of what's going on, do you see actors potentially doing this more often? I don't know that this would work necessarily with high profile actors, but in that mid range actors where like they're established enough where people know their names, but they don't have the ability to like wave a wand and get a couple more projects right down the road like most of the big name actors.
So, just as you were going through the history, I was of the whole controversy. I was just kind of thinking how it's interesting that this show, from the very beginning, from the earliest stages, has been mired in controversy in one way or another. And a lot of that initially, I think, was a lot of bad faith from people who online who have certain, I guess, prejudices against the show or whatever. So, I mean, a lot of that was unfair in the beginning, but what I was interested in reading through the articles and reading through her accounts specifically was the actual details that she mentions. Now, with Ray Fisher, I was critical of him initially because he kept saying, bad things happen, but he would never elaborate on what those bad things were. Now, you can tell everyone that bad things happen, but until you name some names or you describe certain things, it's very hard to get people on your side. Now, Ruby Rose, on the other hand, while she was waffling initially as far as what the reason may be, and as you've already said, there are reasons why she would do that. And let's be honest about something, that Hollywood is a weird industry, right? And I think I might have a more cynical view of things, where I think there's a lot of people in that industry who are kind of fake in terms of what they say. So what I mean by that is they'll typically not say anything bad about anyone or anything. Like, everything is the greatest thing ever when they're doing public interviews. And that's because, they're worried about, not burning bridges, about keeping the friends and connections in order to get, new jobs, etc. And so I think a lot of this, actors, or like what Ruby Rose did, for example, in coming out later and naming all these things, I think I don't know her, obviously, so I can't definitively state what her motives might be. But I think they would tend to do that once they're at a point where, okay, I'm not going to be asked back onto this show. I have no further opportunities with them, so I can name this. Now, when we get to the specifics of what she said, some of it's very concerning, right? Like, I don't think, like, while I can be cynical about her motives, some of the specifics that she mentioned are concerning, specifically with regard to injuries on set. And the statement that Warner Brothers put out, didn't really address that. They were more targeted at her behavior, which, it could be, it's understandable, right? Like, if you see people getting injured, if you're having a bad time on set, of course you're going to have a bad attitude. That's not to say that, Ruby Rose isn't at fault with this, because I think just reading the articles and reading, different people's accounts, I don't think she acted in the most professional manner throughout this thing. But that's not to say she wasn't also wronged in other areas. And I think with regard to the injuries, and she mentioned specifically about COVID, and really being upset with how production was handled during COVID. And we know how in our own jobs and stuff, workplaces, they really try and push things through whenever the going gets tough, and the safety of workers is typically not high on their priority list. So I can sort of understand and see that angle. But I think we often want to paint people neatly into like heroes and villains in this sort of situation. Like, this person's entirely in the right and this person's entirely in the wrong. But I think the truth, as far as we can see from the outside looking in, is probably a bit more nuanced than that.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't think this would become a trend that people would actively, or actors actively, want to engage with, just because it's kind of messy. And it's, it can burn bridges. You have to be very careful. And then you're sending a message to other would-be employers who are unrelated to, the group you're working with at the moment, that you might be difficult to work with and they might avoid you altogether. So I don't know if I see that, as necessarily a trend, to answer your original question, Dustin. But, something, to mention too, Adele, you're talking about, some of the things that she was reporting were happening to her. Something that stuck out to me in the articles was, when she was like name dropping, people. One of the people was Peter Roth, who was the vice president of Warner Brothers TV, I think, hiring like a private investigator supposedly to follow her around. And he stepped down this year. So, not saying that that's it, but to me, like, looking at the history of this and everything that was going on, that was something I was wondering was, is the more of this stuff coming out, is she being more open and honest about it now? Because, this person is out of the position that they were in at the time. Who knows? It's probably, the reality is it's probably a multitude of factors that are all kind of converging, and, these are all just little pieces of a puzzle.
Yeah.
I was just gonna add in there. I definitely did think initially of the Ray Fisher Justice League piece of it. Didn't think too much on it, to be honest with you. And when I was reading all the articles and whatnot about the whole issue with the actress Rose and her role in the Batwoman series, I will be honest with you, a little bit doubting of what she was saying initially, because it was one person saying, like this and that, and I'm having all these issues, and I was like, okay, I don't know, maybe so, maybe not. And then when she kind of got to the point where she was saying, because of COVID, we had to shut down these things, but they wanted to push production through. If I read the article correctly, that's what she was insinuating, was they didn't fully shut down during COVID, so they were still continuing production. And so with that in mind, I guess I could see like, oh, if a stunt company couldn't be there, they couldn't have proper safety places, safety things in place for that, then of course injuries would be sustained, and of course that wouldn't be moral, and then the actors would be the ones suffering for it. So I I think on a large part, I'm still kind of confused about it all and not sure what to think necessarily. But the point that was previously brought up about her having some more concrete proof or being able to back up what she was saying with the names and instances did lend more credibility than the Ray Fisher instance. So on that front, I saw it. And then on the front of COVID being an issue, I saw that as well. But I guess I just always wonder, like, what, if it was that big of an issue and that hard for you, wouldn't that take precedence over anything else? And wouldn't you speak out about it before, even if you had a contract? I mean, I understand it could be a life-changing thing, but wouldn't the truth be more important for you to pursue than anything else? I'm not sure. So anyways, yeah, those are my thoughts on it. I think it's all a little bit muddled.
Yeah, it's definitely muddled as a giant situation as it is, because obviously there is something that was going on, or there was something going on with the stunt situation in the first place, because the fact that she was injured, had to receive surgery because she was injured, that's obviously a huge red flag as it is. However, that said, there's no way of knowing exactly who was to blame. Was it the stunt coordinators who were to blame? Was it something that she incorrectly did? We don't have any idea, because there's never been any sort of investigation that has publicly been made, or that has been, the results have been publicly been released for us to know exactly what was going on in that situation. Obviously, she's hurt. That's a bad situation. She had to have surgery. That's a bad situation. If she truly did have to go back to work because she was being threatened that the entire production was going to have to get fired and they were just going to can the show because she was going to have to go heal, that's messed up. I mean, that truly is. But the thing is, I don't know that that's the case. And we won't know, because that's what she's saying is the case. And obviously Warner Brothers is going to say that isn't the case. That's not at all what was going on. But we don't really know what was going on, because we only have whatever they say. She did release The articles that we have linked in the show notes include a recap of all of the allegations that she made, that Entertainment Weekly kind of gathered up. But there was like a slew of Instagram stories and tweets and all, or I think they were tweets, or maybe they were just Instagram posts that she was releasing like little bits of information at a time, kind of like in pieces, instead of just like doing a video that would showcase everything. Like some YouTubers typically do whenever they have allegations against somebody else. She's just releasing like little bits and pieces. But when you look at everything together, it doesn't. She released like screenshots of emails that she had from the producers talking about certain things when COVID was happening and the issues that was going on before they shut down production. And legitimately, there was some one of the things that she provided emails for was that there was she said that she asked for there to be a rule that you can't scream on set because Doug Ray Scott, who played Jacob Kane, he was yelling at productions or PAs on set, and she asked if there could be a rule. She provided an email showing that she sent an email to the producers asking for there to be a rule in place where there is no screaming allowed on set. She decided to, like in her eyes, she was sticking up for that PA. At the same time, I don't know that this is the case, but everything you assume from what you see in Hollywood, actors are not kind in general all the time to the people that they work with, their managers or their production, the PAs. PAs are, they're a dime a dozen in Hollywood. And I hate to say that for those people who are PAs, but they are well aware that they are very easily replaceable. That's what a PA is in Hollywood. They're there to help, but they're not there to be like indispensable. They're just not, that's not their role. So, I guess there's a variety of different things that go along with this, but in my mind, I'm sitting here thinking like it's the emails that she actually showed and she, was trying to show proof. None of them were some of the things that she was really like the really high accusations, like, production purposely being pushed through, and not having any precautions in place because of COVID. That, like ultimately the first season of the show did not have a full season. It's not like they completely pushed all the way through because they didn't have the full 23 episodes that most of the CW shows typically have. They only had 20 episodes. They might have gotten, one or two episodes more than if they did, because those episodes did end up airing, throughout the time COVID was happening. But, we don't know if that was actually the case. Were they actually pushing it through? Were they foregoing any precautions that were taking place all over the world when it came to that critical time where COVID was in a really bad spot? Is there people that are part of the production crew that actually contracted COVID because of what was going on? That would be stone cold hard proof, but there's nothing like that in the stuff that she provided. She was provided emails talking about some of the minor stuff. She accused Peter Roth of having one of his assistants steam his pants, his crotch area, while he wore them because there was creases in his pants. Like, I'm not sure what that has to do with it, other than I guess if it's a female assistant, it could be considered, some sort of sexual abuse or something like that because of the area that she was steaming in the pants. There's no proof of any of that. The problem is the stuff that she provided proof on isn't exactly the same, and that's why it comes to me as very much like the Ray Fisher situation, where it's like, I'm going to say all these bad things. Well, Ray Fisher put it off saying a bunch of bad stuff for a long time, just made it seem like everything was just really bad and didn't want to say exactly what happened. She, on the other hand, didn't do that. She said she gave excuses for every other reason as to why she left the series, except for what she is saying now is the actual reasons she left. And ultimately, we don't have a lot of proof about the stuff that she's saying. Now, that's not to say that she can't come out and provide even more proof, and maybe she will. I know that at some point while she was releasing a lot of this proof that she had, she said that she was getting off of social media for a while because she wanted, and she was going to be in a cabin in the woods, kind of like taking a break and, meditating or whatever. And that's fine. I mean, that's what she chose to do. It's just, it's odd timing. It's, in today's world, it seems odd that an actor would have as many issues as they do and then not speak not come forward to one of these big these big publications that are online that literally do stuff like this all the time. I mean, when you look back to the Me Too era, everybody in Hollywood who was having issues with Harvey Weinstein or something, they were speaking out. And not that everybody is going to speak out immediately and have the ability to speak out right away because of whatever, either NDAs or repercussions for getting future jobs or whatever. Not everybody's going to have that ability to speak out, but these are like serious accusations where, I mean, obviously someone died on set, and if there was something that was like not being done right, you would think that somebody would want to speak out because of the fact that someone died. She was obviously injured. Somebody else, burnt their face horribly. Like, there was some bad stuff that happened on set where you would think that you would want to make it public if these were reasons you were leaving a show. And to kind of just do it through some Instagram posts or Instagram stories, that to me doesn't seem like it's the right way to go about doing this when you have the ability. And you probably have the ability to get to a big publication and say, listen, I want to tell my story and I want it told right. Help me out here. And that would have probably been the better way to do it if this was all exactly true. But I truly believe this is a very fine line of like he said, she said, and there's probably issues on both sides of the thing. It's not just one side's correct or wrong.
Yeah, I think what you mentioned about, just there were so many injuries, that's what kind of makes me think that there were issues with safety on set. And the fact that Warner Brothers did not deny that those injuries, like they issued a statement and they didn't have any denial that happened. The other thing that I want to mention is like, even with the Me Too era, or like with the Me Too thing against Harvey Weinstein, it took years for them to speak up. And I think that's one thing in Hollywood and in all, I guess, workplaces, but I think especially in Hollywood, the power dynamics are often kind of intimidating to people, and it is hard to sort of speak up. That being said, she probably could have gone to a publication, as you said, and given them her story, because and it should be noted as well, in interest of fairness, that there were two actors on the show, the one who plays, I think, Poison Ivy, and the one who plays Luke Fox, who have come out and voiced their support for the show and, said that Ruby Rose was fired, etc. Now, again, the cynical side of me will say, like, okay, that's just because they're still employed by the show. They want to stay employed by the show, so they're going to support it at whatever cost. But she does say that there are people who would support her, and I think she, for I guess medical reasons, she can't reveal the names of the people who were injured so horrifically. I mean, one person was paralyzed, one person, as you said, had their face burned off, etc. So I'm sure those people, if there was some sort of investigation behind the scenes, and they were granted anonymity or like a safety to speak out, I think they would. But again, like, I don't know if that's going to happen. And then the other side of this too is, okay, Ray Fisher and Ruby Rose, they've spoken out about this. So what's the end game here? Like, what is the expectation for what should happen? Because I think we're far enough, like, just to use the Ray Fisher situation as a comparison, nothing really happened. I mean, all this stuff came out, and okay, like, Zack Snyder's still gonna go off making movies. Everyone else who was involved with they're still doing things in some way. So I'm not sure, again, what the end game is supposed to be here. That's not to say that people, if there isn't something wrong, people shouldn't speak up, because obviously they should. I guess I don't have an answer to that. I don't know what's supposed to happen next.
The problem that I have is, if the intent is to ensure that stuff like this doesn't happen, the safety issues are addressed, with the pandemic, stuff like that would have gotten addressed. That I don't see how bringing it up a year later is doing the people who are still presently working on the show any favors. That's the problem that I have with this entire thing. I don't know why suddenly. I mean, like, there was a point when she first made accusations against the production of the show. She did say that one of the reasons that motivated her to say something now was the fact that she was involved with the sequel to The Meg, which was being produced by Warner Brothers, and she just recently found out that her character is not going to be in the sequel after expecting the character to be in the sequel for years since the show, since that movie was first made. She just found out that the character is not going to be in the movie, and that, of course, isn't exactly great timing to say, hey, I've decided to say these accusations about a company who happens to be the same company who just conveniently has my character removed from a film that I was just a supporting character on, and I expected to be in that thing. So there's already some problems with the motivation behind that. If the motivation was, hey, listen, there was a lot of issues with safety, and when safety was, maybe it wasn't necessarily safety, but when issues arose and there was problems, the production didn't really deal with these issues in a way that made sense. Like, she made a big point about how when the person who died, when that happened, and the person who got burned really bad, there wasn't any sort of like therapy for people who it wasn't even offered. Like, here's some therapy for those of you who had to see this horrific thing happen. Be able to go to therapy, be able to do it on the company's dime, anything like that. That was one of her big things that she said should have happened that didn't happen. And I'm not saying it shouldn't have. That should happen. However, I'm not sure how a year later, and obviously a lot of the same people probably in place who are in charge of safety, who are in charge of stunts, potentially still working on the same production. When she leaves, the only person she protected by leaving was herself by not speaking up. That's the problem I have with this entire situation, is I don't really see the motivation for it. Like, what is the reason now? Why now is the reason, other than conveniently the third season of the show just picked up, just started airing. She conveniently had she had a platform. She said that she was upset about what happened with the film that she was supposed to be on that's no longer happening. It doesn't feel like there's any like motivation to help the people who were really affected by this other than herself. And that's where I come from this, like, it feels like a very selfish reasoning for saying something now, because what is it really going to change? What's going to happen now that wouldn't have happened a year ago if she would have spoke out, and instead of using her ability to leave the production and find a way out to keep herself in a better position, why wouldn't she have spoken up and use that same power to like get something changed for the sake of the stunt people who are, having horrible accidents happen and things like that? So that's my issue with this entire situation.
Yeah, and I think as I said before, like, I'm kind of cynical about it in the sense that I don't think any of her motives, from afar at least, I don't know her personally, I don't think her motives are altruistic in any way. I think she's primarily motivated by self-interest, and to do what is best for her and her image. However, that being said, that, like, to me at least, that doesn't mean that bad stuff didn't happen on set and bad stuff didn't happen to her. And, just to sort of kind of support that point, it does seem to be a bit of an institutional issue in Hollywood, because, I mean, we look at the Alec Baldwin movie and what just happened with that. And, obviously that became big news because someone was literally shot and killed on set. But just from reading some stories about that, I read that there was a lot of other issues that had been going on behind the scenes with that movie that we probably would have never heard of had someone not been killed in such a dramatic way. So I think this is a sort of institutional problem, and I think the more that these things happen, or the more that they come to light, the more pressure there will be on, the producers or like the creators of these films and TV shows to actually implement proper safety measures. So, I mean, and that can only be a good thing. It's just unfortunate it has to happen in this way.
Yeah, and I was going to add to Dustin's point. It's interesting that she had been dealt with so poorly by a company. And then when and was waiting for her role in another movie by the same company. I wish I had more insight into the realm of Hollywood and into the realm of show business, because a lot of it is conjecture on my end, but it is kind of interesting there. And to your point, what both you guys brought up, I do think that it comes across a little bit more, her coming out with all this now is more of dramatic effect than anything else, because it wasn't, something that she spoke up against promptly when all of those issues were going down. But on the other hand, and to kind of play devil's advocate to my own point, it could have been she felt unsafe to do so. I'm not sure. Like as an actress, as a woman in that field, perhaps there was something else that held her back that she hasn't mentioned yet. And that could have been something there too. So it comes across as very interesting, and it definitely doesn't carry this. It has more weight than the Ray Fisher instances for sure, I think. But it's still not clear either, and unfortunate to hear about, honestly speaking. Like, could you imagine being on a set and dealing with somebody getting their face burned off, or even her own injuries, and all of that? Like, that's absolutely tragic and should not happen. And the fact that even maybe did or didn't, depending on what is true and what isn't, is just absolutely horrifying to hear about. So, it's all a very interesting situation, I think.
Yes. All right. So with that, we're going to leave this episode. We're going to wrap this episode up. It's obviously an ongoing thing. If something else comes up, we will do another update on it in the future, but we're kind of going to leave it there. We leave it up to you guys. What do you guys think of all of everything that's happened? Do you side with Ruby Rose? Do you side with the production side of things? Are you kind of split in the middle, or kind of how things are? Are you, do you really think that there is a right and a wrong side? Because quite honestly, like I said earlier, I don't really know that. I think there was issues on both sides, and I think that's where we're kind of at right now until either further proof comes out or more details come out or other allegations from other people outside of the core group of the production and Ruby Rose's allegations releases. I don't know that there's much more to say at this point. So with all of that being said, thank you so much for listening to this episode. If you are interested in anything related to Batman when it comes to movies, television, video games, merchandise, or anything else related to the Bat fandom, including comics, be sure to check out our website, thebatmanuniverse.net, for all kinds of content for news and reviews and all kinds of other stuff. You can follow us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube. We also have Discord. All of the links can be found at thebatmanuniverse.net, where you can get in touch with us. Wherever you are listening to this review, please take a moment to leave us a review. That is always greatly appreciated. And if you are so inclined to support this show or any element of what we do at TBU, check out the support TBU page found at thebatmanuniverse.net with all kinds of different ways that you can support us going forward to make more episodes and to make more content that you guys enjoy. With all that being said, for Adil, Hanan, and Scott, this has been the Batman Universe Podcast. We will see you guys next time.